Section 6 of the History and Literature of the Early Church. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History and Literature of the Early Church by James Orr. The Age of the Apologists, AD 117 to 180. The period of the Apologists is covered by the three remaining names in our list of the good emperors. They are Hadrian, AD 117 to 138, Antoninus Pius, AD 138 to 161, and Marcus Aurelius, AD 161 to 180. The period is marked externally by intermittent but severe persecution of the Christians, and by the commencement of written attacks on Christianity, internally by the rise of apology and the development of Gnosticism and Montanism. Despite persecution, the remarkable progress of the Church is continued. 1. Hadrian and Antoninus Pius. The attitude of the versatile Emperor Hadrian, in whose reign written apology began, see below, was on the whole not unfavourable to Christianity. There is, however, evidence that both in his reign and that of his successor, though no formal persecution is reckoned, the Christians were continually exposed to harassment and outbreaks of violence. A rescript of the Emperor to Fundinus, the proconsul of Asia, whose predecessor had written much as Pliny did, to ask direction, forbids him to receive irregular accusations or to yield to popular outcry. If Christians are proved to break the laws, footnote, it is a moot point whether breaking the laws here means more than the mere proof that one was a Christian, end footnote, they are to be punished, but libellers are to be punished still more severely. Hadrian nominated to succeed him Antoninus, better known, from his dutifulness in insisting on the deification of Hadrian, as Antoninus Pius. With him was associated during his reign of 23 years his nephew, Marcus Aurelius. Antoninus was, however, the acting and responsible emperor. His clemency, uprightness, and affableness of disposition are the praise of all historians. His reign has commonly been regarded as free from the stain of persecution. This is a mistake, though probably the emperor himself was not to blame. It is doubtful whether he is the Antoninus who, when proconsul of Asia, after some Christians had been condemned, and when the rest in great numbers presented themselves at his tribunal, said, "Miserable men, if ye desire to die, have ye not ropes and precipices?" Tertullian. But the two Apologies of Justin Martyr and his dialogue with Trypho, all of this reign, are indubitable evidence that Christians were everywhere objects of hatred and persecution and had to endure losses, tortures, and death for their religion, e.g. Dialogue with Trypho 110. Specific cases in Second Apology 1:2. Melito of Sardis, another apologist, speaks of numerous edicts issued by Antoninus, e.g. to the Laricians, Thessalonians, Athenians, forbidding the cities to take new measures against the Christians. This shows that the emperor both knew of these persecutions and, in accordance with his humane character, took steps to check their violence. 2. The martyrdom of Polycarp. We have, however, one undoubted instance of martyrdom in this reign, the details of which, preserved in a contemporary narrative, throw light upon the whole. Polycarp of Smyrna has already been before us in connection with Ignatius. Of his earlier life we know little. He was 86 years old at the time of his martyrdom, AD 155, so may have been born AD 69 or 70. He was a disciple of St. John in Asia Minor, and often repeated to the youthful Irenaeus, who was his disciple, the things he had heard from the apostle. Footnote: on his visit to Anicestus, the Roman bishop, see below, page 123. End footnote. The account of his martyrdom is given in a beautiful and affecting letter of the church of which he was bishop. The great festival of Asia was being held at Smyrna. Some cause had aroused the fury of the populace against the Christians. The Jews are specially mentioned as active in this persecution. Several Christians had already perished amidst dreadful torments when the cry went up, "Let search be made for Polycarp." Polycarp at first concealed himself, then, on his retreat being discovered, surrendered himself to the will of God. On the way to the city, he was taken up into the chariot of the captain of police, who, with his father, urged him to recant. Failing in their object, they thrust him out with violence. Arrived at the stadium, he was interrogated by the proconsul. "Swear by the genius of Caesar. Say, away with the atheists." Polycarp, looking to heaven, said, "Away with the atheists?" "Revile Christ," urged the proconsul. "Fourscore and 6 years have I served him," was the memorable reply, "and he hath done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me?" The herald proclaimed, "Polycarp hath confessed himself a Christian," and the cry rose to have a lion let loose on him. But the games were ended. The shout then was that he should be burned alive. Polycarp, at his own request, was only bound, not nailed to the stake. It seemed for a time to the wondering bystanders as though the fire refused to touch him. To end the scene, an executioner was ordered to stab him. Footnote: the legendary feature of a dove issuing from his side is not in the oldest version Eusebius, and is probably a corruption or interpolation. End footnote. The poor malice of the Jews frustrated even the desire of the brethren for possession of his body, which was consumed. The bishop's death stopped the persecution, and probably sent many home to think, with the consequence that they became Christians too. Such at least we know to have been a frequent outcome of these martyrdoms. Justin, Dialogue with Trypho 1:10. Second Apology 2:12. 3. The Age of the Antonines. Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius is the classic representative of his age. Vespasian, in the previous century, had instituted a salaried hierarchy of teachers, rhetoricians, grammarians, philosophers, by whom the Roman people was to be lectured into wisdom and virtue. The result was a species of ethical, philosophical, and even religious revival in the empire. Paganism had its itinerant preachers, e.g. Dion Chrysostom, Maximus of Tyre, whose orations or harangues were the counterparts of the Christian sermons. These tendencies came to a head in the reign of Marcus Aurelius. For once in the world's history, Plato's dream of a state which had a philosopher for its ruler and was governed by philosophic maxims seemed about to be realized. Personally, Marcus is justly reckoned one of the noblest characters of heathenism. His meditations embody the highest ideal of stoical morality, in union with a firm confidence in a rational ordering of the world, characteristic of the later Stoicism. Yet it is the stoical, not the Christian ideal. It lacks the tenderness, humility, dependence, benignity, hopefulness of the Christian temper. Between Christianity, with its confession of sin and moral weakness, and Aurelius, with his philosophic self-sufficiency, passive resignation, stern suppression of passion, and cheerless fatalism, there could be nothing but antagonism. There is but one allusion to Christianity in the Meditations, 11:3, and it breathes the iciest contempt. Marcus too, if a Stoic, was a devoted Roman, fixed in his determination to maintain the established institutions. His character was not without its strain of superstition. Footnote: see Fruda, Renan, Merivale, Ulhorn, etc., noted at end. End footnote. And it is noted of him that in his later years his melancholy disposition grew upon him, and he became peculiarly zealous in heathen rites. It is scarcely wonderful, therefore, that, even under this paragon of emperors, Christian blood flowed more freely than it had flowed any time during the previous half-century, that, in fact, the wound was never staunched during his reign. Lightfoot. To him is ascribed what we are accustomed to reckon the fourth persecution. 4. Persecutions under Marcus, the martyrs of Vina and Lyon. There is one story told of Marcus which, if it could be believed, would clear his memory in part of the stain of persecution. It is the story of the Thundering Legion. Tertullian and others relate that in one of his campaigns the army was in extreme distress from thirst. The Christian soldiers of the 12th Legion prayed, and, in answer to their prayers, copious showers of rain fell, and a violent storm drove away the enemy. Appended to Justin's first Apology is an alleged epistle from the Emperor to the Senate, ascribing his deliverance to the prayers of the Christians, and commanding that they be no more molested. Unhappily, the epistle is not genuine. It seems certain that the deliverance took place, only the heathen attributed it not to the prayers of the Christians, but to the interposition of their own gods. In the pagan account, Marcus is represented as stretching his hands to heaven and invoking Jupiter. The positive evidences of persecution in this reign, and of the emperor's implication in it, are not few. At Rome itself there is the case of Justin Martyr and his 6 companions, who suffered under the prefect Rusticus, a tutor of Aurelius, about AD 163-66. Footnote: see below page 77, end footnote. The emperor could hardly have been ignorant of this case. There is the testimony of Melito of Sardis, circa AD 170, to a very severe persecution in Asia Minor. He speaks of God's servants being persecuted as they never were before by new edicts, which gave the property of Christians to their accusers. Melito professes to doubt whether these edicts emanated from the emperor, but the doubt can only be assumed for the purposes of his appeal. A proconsul would not issue such edicts on his own responsibility. Even the heathen Celsus, who wrote in this reign, see below, speaks of Christ as banished from every land and sea, and of his servants as bound and led to punishment and put upon the stake. Origen 8:39. But the chief persecution we know of, which stands out with the distinctness of a limelight picture in its blending of the horrible and the sublime, is that of the churches of Vina and Lyon in Gaul. It was a case in which Marcus Aurelius was expressly consulted, and gave his sanction to what was done. The account of it is contained in a circular epistle addressed by the churches, footnote, possibly written by Irenaeus, end footnote, to their brethren in Asia and Phrygia, the pearl of the Christian literature of the 2nd century, Renan calls it. Lyon and Vina were two cities of Gaul where the Rhone and the Saône join. Lyon was a great seat of Caesar worship and the place of the annual meeting of the Gallic deputies in council. The persecution was in AD 177, in the midst of the closing troubles of Marcus's reign. It began with acts of mob violence. Then the prominent persons of the two churches were arrested and dragged with clamour and insult before the tribunals. Tortures beyond description were applied to the Christians to make them confess to secret crimes, but without effect. 4 names stand out, conspicuous for heroism and constancy. Sanctus, a deacon from Vina; Maturus, a recent convert; Attalus from Pergamos; above all, Blandina, a slave girl, whose mistress was also one of the martyrs. Blandina was torn and mangled almost beyond recognition, without extorting from her more than the words, "I am a Christian. There is nothing vile done among us." The aged Bishop Pothinus, 90 years old, was dragged before the judgment seat, and there so cruelly maltreated that when cast into prison he lingered only 2 days. Irenaeus succeeded him. A new round of torments was devised for the others: mangling by wild beasts, roasting in an iron chair, etc. Blandina was suspended on a stake and exposed to the attacks of wild animals, but they refused at this time to touch her. Attalus, a Roman citizen, was reserved till Caesar's pleasure should be known. The final scene of the martyrdom was on the day of the great festival. The emperor's reply had come, ordering that such as confessed themselves Christians should be put to death. All who proved steadfast were brought forth to punishment. The Romans were beheaded, the rest were taken to the amphitheatre. Again the round of frightful torture was gone through. Attalus, as a specially notable Christian, was, despite his Roman citizenship, roasted in the chair. Blandina herself, after renewed manglings and burnings, was enclosed in a net and given to be tossed by a bull. Thus, last of all her company, she perished. The knell of slavery was surely rung when scenes like these could be enacted. The rage of the people wreaked itself even on the lifeless remains of the victims. To prevent resurrection they burned them, and scattered the ashes in the road. What strikes one in the pathetic narrative of these sufferings is its tone of calm sobriety, its utter absence of boasting or spiritual pride or over-eager desire for martyrdom. Other religions have their martyrs, but have they martyrs like these? 5. The rise of apology. The rise of a written apology for Christianity in this age is a fact of great significance. It shows that Christianity had entered literary circles, shows also the growing boldness of the Christians and their confidence in their ability to refute calumny and vanquish prejudice by an openly reasoned statement of their case. They had the world against them, but their invincible reliance was on the power of truth. They were ready to lay down their lives as heretofore, but they would not let the world remain in blindness as to the nature of the religion it assailed. They set themselves to vindicate Christianity, to expose also the folly and immorality of the pagan idolatry by which it was opposed. The apologetic literature of the 2nd century, therefore, is both voluminous and rich. It covers a wide area in space. Its authors are men of culture and learning, skilled reasoners, many of them philosophers by profession, who, at the cost of their worldly prospects, put their talent and eloquence at the service of the religion they had espoused. It breathes throughout a tone of dignity and lofty conviction, and must have been a powerful factor in aiding the progress of Christianity it so strikingly describes. Such an apology was demanded, if by nothing else, by the slanders in circulation about the Christians, and almost universally believed: cannibalism, promiscuous immorality, worships of ass's head, etc. The refutation of these charges is complete. Scarcely less effective is the reply to the charges of impiety and disloyalty. While the exhibition of the truth and reasonableness of Christian doctrine, and of the purity and simplicity of Christian worship and morality, is heightened by the dark background of heathen irreligion and vice against which it is cast, the apologists may be grouped as those belonging to the reign of Hadrian, Quadratus, Aristides; those of the reign of Antoninus, Justin, Tatian; and those of the time of Marcus Aurelius, Athenagoras, Theophilus, Melito, Minucius Felix, etc. Tertullian and Origen belong to the next period. 6. The earlier apologists, Justin Martyr. The oldest apologist, Quadratus, is little more than a name to us. Footnote: possibly he is identical with Quadratus, an evangelist mentioned by Eusebius, 337. End footnote. He addressed an apology to the Emperor Hadrian, Athens, AD 125 to 126, of which only a single extract is preserved. He lays stress upon the Saviour's miracles. The other apologist of this reign, Aristides, was, until lately, even more completely unknown. It was only known that he was a philosopher of Athens, and had also presented an apology to Hadrian, AD 125 to 126. In 1889, however, a complete Syriac version of this apology was brought to light. Footnote: the discovery was made by Dr. Rendell Harris in the convent of St. Catherine, Mount Sinai. An inscription in the Syriac version puts the apology under Antoninus, but the ordinary date seems preferable. The author knows the Didache, or the work on which it is based. End footnote. 2 Armenian fragments earlier. Then the remarkable discovery was made that scholars had this apology all the while, and were not aware of the fact. In a famous medieval romance, Balaam and Josaphat, an apology for Christianity is put into the mouth of one of the characters. This turns out to be substantially the apology of Aristides, of which the Greek text has thus been obtained. The apology is mainly a defense of theism against the errors of paganism, and a powerful vindication of Christian morality. It testifies to the existence of a written gospel. A third writer, Aristo of Pella, reputed author of a lost dialogue between a Christian, Jason, and a Jew, Papiscus, may belong to the end of this reign. The work is before or about the middle of the century. Greatest of all the apologies of this period, whose works have come down to us, is Justin the Martyr. From him we have 2 apologies addressed to Antoninus Pius and the Roman Senate, circa AD 150, and a dialogue with Trypho, a Jew, a little later in date. Other writings attributed to him are of doubtful genuineness or spurious. Justin was a native of Flavia Neapolis, Sichem, in Samaria. In the introduction to his dialogue, he narrates the manner of his conversion. He had gone from one philosophical school to another in search of truth. A conversation with an old man whom he met on the seashore directed him to the Scriptures and to Christ. He became persuaded that here was the only sure and worthy philosophy, and, still wearing his philosopher's cloak, thenceforth set himself to impart to others the light he had obtained. We find him at Ephesus and Rome, teaching and disputing in his double capacity of philosopher and Christian. His disputes brought him into collision with one Crescens, a cynic, who plotted his death and that of his disciples. Through the machinations of this man, or in some other way, he and 6 companions were apprehended. Brought before the prefect Rusticus, they were condemned to death by decapitation, AD 163 to 166. Footnote: the acts of this martyrdom are accepted as reliable. End footnote. Justin's first apology is in the main a nobly conceived and admirably sustained piece of argument. It consists of 3 parts. The first refuting the charges against the Christians, the second proving the truth of the Christian religion, chiefly from prophecy. Footnote: the apologetic argument from prophecy would need to be wholly recast in the light of modern knowledge, yet the scriptures chiefly relied on are those which the Church has always accepted as in a true sense messianic. End footnote. The third explaining the nature of the Christian worship. The second apology was evoked by a specially shameful instance of persecution under Urbicus the prefect. The dialogue with Trypho is an account of a long disputation at Ephesus with a liberal-minded Jew, and meets his objections to Christianity. Incidentally, Justin's writings throw valuable light on many matters of importance as, e.g., on the existence and use of the canonical Gospels, called by him the Memoirs of the Apostles. First Apology 66-67, Dialogue with Trypho 10, 100, 103, on the victorious spread of Christianity, Dialogue 117. Footnote: the catacombs too attest this, and show that Christianity had entered the highest ranks, e.g. cemeteries of Praetextatus and Caecilia. See Neglected Factors, pages 132 and following. End footnote. And on the details of the Christian weekly service. First Apology 65-67. The picture of the last is singularly lifelike and minute. The day of worship, as in Pliny, is Sunday. The service is under the direction of a president, not even yet by Justin called a bishop. The reading of the prophets and the Gospels is an established part of the service. The president delivers a homily or discourse. The congregation rise at prayer and respond to the prayer of the president with an Amen. The Eucharist is celebrated at the close of the prayer after sermon, the agape probably in the evening. The distribution is made by the deacons, who take portions to the absent. After the Eucharistic offerings are made for the poor, the sick, prisoners, etc. The other apologist of the reign of Antoninus is Tatian, an Assyrian by birth, and disciple of Justin's. He afterwards fell into Gnostic heresy. Footnote: see chapter 7. End footnote. Tatian's apologetic work is an address to the Greeks, AD 150, learned but bitter, biting, and contemptuous in spirit. He is better known through his famous Diatessaron, or Harmony of the Four Gospels, the recovery of which in its complete form in an Arabic translation is one of the sensations of recent years. Footnote: published in 1888, a Latin reproduction of an Armenian translation of the Syriac commentary of Ephraim Syrus on the Harmony was published in 1876. End footnote. This finally establishes the character of the Gospels described by Justin as in use in the churches. 7. Later Apologists. The apologists of the reign of Marcus Aurelius can be more rapidly enumerated. The first, Athenagoras, was, like Aristides, a philosopher of Athens. He is the most polished and classical in style of all the apologists. His apology, entitled An Intercession for the Christians, AD 177, is chiefly devoted to the refutation of the charges against the Christians, atheism, eating human flesh, immorality, and is a piece of calm, reasonable, effective pleading. He wrote also a work on the resurrection. Theophilus, Bishop of Antioch, belongs to the severe school of apologists. He wrote an apology in 3 books addressed to his friend Autolycus circa AD 180. He can see no good in the philosophers and poets, whose errors and contradictions he shows up in detail. The few grains of truth he finds in them were stolen, he thinks, from the Hebrew prophets. He has some forcible chapters on the purity and beauty of the Christian morality. Theophilus is the first to mention the Gospel of St. John by name. The Gospel itself, of course, was in use long before. It was included, e.g., in the Diatessaron of Tatian. Melito, Bishop of Sardis, circa AD 170, has been quoted on the edicts of emperors. His apology to Marcus Aurelius is known only from extracts. It is characteristic of the age that, in addressing the emperor, he speaks of the new religion as our philosophy. Melito wrote numerous other works. To him we owe also the first Christian list of the Hebrew scriptures, i.e., of the Old Testament canon. Hermias, date uncertain, wrote A Mockery of Heathen Philosophers Still Extant. The title explains the character of the work. Other writers whose apologetic works are lost were Apollinarius, Bishop of Hierapolis, circa AD 174, and Miltiades, the former the author of 5 books against the Greeks, addressed to the emperor, the latter of an apology addressed to the rulers of this world, with other treatises. Finally, there is the beautiful and able book of the Latin apologist Minucius Felix. There is a doubt indeed whether this work should be placed here or later after Tertullian, but the presumption is strong in favour of the earlier date. Fronto, e.g., who wrote against the Christians in this reign, see below, is spoken of as a contemporary. The piece itself is in the form of a dialogue between Octavius and a heathen Caecilius, friends of Minucius, a Roman advocate, hence the title Octavius. Caecilius states the case for the old faith, and Octavius replies. The intrinsic worth of the book is enhanced by its high artistic and literary merit. 8. Other writers. A passing allusion should be made to 2 other writers of note in this age. Hegesippus, who wrote 5 books of memoirs sometime between AD 175 and AD 189, and Dionysius, Bishop of Corinth, circa 170, whose fame rests chiefly on his pastoral epistles, of which he wrote a great many. The works of both are lost, but Eusebius has preserved valuable extracts. The memoirs of Hegesippus were not history in the strict sense, but appear to have been a collection of reminiscences of the apostolic and post-apostolic ages, drawn partly from written, partly from oral sources, in part also from the writer's own observation. The author was extensively travelled, and the information he had to convey would, if we possessed it, be extremely useful. 9. The literary attack on Christianity. No sketch of the literature of this period would be complete which, besides a survey of the apologists, did not include some reference to the literary opposition to Christianity. It is another testimony to the growing importance of Christianity that the age which saw the rise of a formal Christian apology saw also the beginnings of a formal literary attack of exceptional skill and keenness. The earliest of the literary assailants we know of was Fronto, tutor of Marcus Aurelius, who published an oration in which he reiterated the scandalous charges brought against the Christians. His argument is conjectured by Renan to be nearly textually embodied in the discourse of Caecilius in the Octavius of Minucius Felix. A more formidable assailant was Celsus, whose true discourse, circa AD 180, was the subject of Origen's later classical refutation in his 8 books against Celsus, AD 249. Celsus is probably to be identified with an alleged Epicurean of that name, an able literary man and friend of Lucian, who wrote also against magic. Of wide reading and undeniable acuteness, he spares no pains to damage and discredit the Christians, while acquitting them of the graver calumnies that were current. He first introduces a Jew to gather up the slanders of the synagogue, then in his own name subjects the gospel history and beliefs of the Christians to criticism and ridicule from the standpoint of the true philosophy. Everything in Christianity, particularly its doctrine of redemption, is an offence to him. It is not too much to say of his work that, relatively to its age, it is as trenchant an assault as any that has since come from the artillery of unbelief. Yet, as far as can be seen, its influence was nil in stopping the triumphant march of Christianity. Its obvious unfairness and utter insensibility to the holy love and power of the Christian religion deprived it of all effect on minds that knew from experience what Christianity was. Another typical opponent of Christianity in this age was the sceptical and witty Lucian of Samosata, a born hater of shams, but withal cynical and heartless in his judgments on men and things. In his Peregrinus Proteus, he describes how a cynic charlatan succeeded in imposing on the Christians, and was made the object of their lavish kindness when in prison for his faith. Yet the picture he draws of the attentions of Christians to their unfortunate brethren, intended to cover them with ridicule, in reality redounds to their highest honour. Only Lucian was not the man to see this. End of section 6.